Hi, Seth Khan here. I want to talk about a very important topic for our time, and that is executive leadership in turbulent times. In other words, what are the leaders supposed to do when times are filled with uncertainty, challenge, and disruption? This is something that we've dealt with before. I know the unique circumstances of today have not been dealt with before, the uncertainty around tariffs, for example. However, there have been recently major times where the United States has gone through a significant disruption, and we can now look back at those times and ask, what from our recent past have we learned? And I'm thinking in particular of September 11th, the mortgage crisis, and COVID-19. All of those were huge disruptions to the American economy and the global economy, actually. So I want to look at what it is that leaders do during these times that helps them to succeed, to navigate the tremendous unsettling that's taking place with their customers, inside their organizations, with their investors and shareholders, with their partners, and with all of the institutions that they interact with. So let me just first tell you kind of at the top level what it is that we're looking at. And then I'm going to go into each one with a little bit more detail. I call these the 7 elements of leadership for turbulent times. The first is situational awareness, then strategic agility. Third is stakeholder alignment. Fourth is value-driven decision-making. Fifth is visibility and voice. Sixth is culture of adaptation. And 7th is systemic foresight. So let me break these down now a little bit and talk. And by the way, I have a paper on this, which I will put in the comments below so that you can download this and share it with your colleagues and think about it and read it through again. So first, let's start with situational awareness. How do we know what's going on? The insight here is that you can't lead what you can't see. And so you need to bring together people who represent multiple perspectives in the most important areas where you are doing business, where your work is being conducted. And that includes with your customers, it includes with your sales force, it includes with your senior leadership and your critical partners. And if you're an association, of course, it includes your membership. And the thing to do here is to convene a roundtable that meets periodically where the members, the individual members, have differing perspectives intentionally. And you don't want to drive conversation to a point of consensus. Instead, you want the multiple perspectives to create a in-depth view of the circumstances that you're facing. Let me just give you a quick metaphor here. If I were to place a beach ball between you and me, and it was sitting perfectly still in such a way that when I looked at it, what I saw was a yellow circle, and what you looked at it, what you saw was a green circle. Well, we could have a fight over whether it was a yellow circle or a green circle. But as soon as one of us moved position, as soon as the wind blew, as soon as another person entered the room, we would quickly determine that we were looking at a sphere. And a sphere is possible to be fully yellow on one side and fully green on another. So what you see is that by not trying to drive consensus, we're forced to grapple with an object that has more dimensions than any one of us perceives. We need more than one person. And I have used this exercise in organizations. For example, the World Bank, when we were grappling with the spread of HIV in Africa, and we identified over 70 different dimensions based on different perspectives of our stakeholders and the people who were resident in the countries that we were working to support. Over 70. And to the extent that you do not seek out an additional view, you actually undermine your ability to create effective solutions. So again, the action here is to bring together a group of people who are looking at the circumstances that are taking place from differing perspectives, have them weigh in collectively without influencing them to coalesce around a consensus, and use the differing perspectives to build out the depth of the model that you're assembling about your circumstances. This is what will give you the situational awareness. And it needs to be done on a regular interval because the situation is dynamic and changing all the time. I recommend for CEOs of organizations, when times are really turbulent, to do this on a weekly basis, to convene these people on a weekly basis. And this is something now that can be done with Zoom. And so it can be very low labor intensity, but the value is immense. Second, strategic agility. So what is agility? Agility is the ability to be nimble and responsive as circumstances develop. And what we want is we want the strategy of the organization to be nimble. That's the game plan that tells you what it is that you're doing to win in today's market. It needs to have that nimbleness. It needs to have that ability to flex and move in real time. And you can do this by working with multiple scenarios as things unfold. And ask yourself always, what is another course or direction that we can take if the circumstances develop in this way? And what about if they develop in that way? And we've seen examples of this in the real market. Not that long ago, some of you will remember Circuit City, which no longer exists because it had no strategic agility. It just kept doing what it always did as consumer interest in gadgetry and stereo equipment, televisions, and all of that. As that was morphing, Circuit City was unable to adapt. But you can contrast that with IBM. IBM was in jeopardy with its consulting services and other elements that it provided, and it was able to really shift with the market, and as a result, it grew tremendously. So strategic ability is key. Third is stakeholder alignment. You need to know who your stakeholders are, and you need to be aligned with them. The alignment actually creates stabilization when there's chaos. So you can't necessarily control the market conditions, but what you can control is your ability to align with your core groups. And by core groups, of course, I mean your members if you're an association, or your customers if you're a business. You also want to be thinking about thought leaders in your space, and you want to be thinking about partners and even staff. And by understanding what their needs are, by interacting with them regularly, asking, bringing together thought leaders who can analyze their behavior, by staying aligned with them, you create a kind of meta-stability that can survive the ups and downs as the market kind of swells and ebbs, and that kind of inner guidance will allow you to steer through the storm. So stakeholder alignment is key. The fourth area I want to talk about is value-driven decision-making. This is something that everybody is going to look to you for, right? They're going to ask the question, how are you deciding what it is to do as circumstances are swiftly changing? What's guiding you in this process? Well, values should be your compass, and values are what your business is built on. You have particular values that allow you to deliver products and services to your clients that they want, and they come to you for those values. So as long as you stay aligned with them in your decision-making process, you won't alienate the key constituents. So that is key. The action here is to clarify your values. Understand what are we providing to our key constituents that they look to us as a beacon for. And then to make decisions. And sometimes that will take you far afield. Sometimes because you have a particular value, as circumstances swiftly move, you'll stand out because you'll be staying true to your value. And it will look like you've actually deviated from what's going on in the market when in fact, what you've held true to are your values. And those people who value them, those people who are your constituents will say, that's the right thing to do. And that will help. Fifth, visibility and voice. Many leaders I know, when the going gets tough, hunker down and don't communicate because they're afraid of alienating someone. This is exactly the kind of thing that you want to avoid. Silence creates confusion. When people don't know where you stand or what it is that you're trying to do or how you're adapting to circumstances, they start to make it up. And of course, what they're making up isn't based on anything, so they're all over the map. And before you know it, you can have chaos inside the social network of your organization, which you do not want. So you want to be able to understand really what do you stand for, and you need to start giving voice to that. And so how can you do this? Well, first of all, you should be sharing public messages that are driven by value, and you should be standing out with those messages so that they're easy to find. You want people who need those messages, particular constituent groups, maybe the press, whoever it is that you find as a voice for your work, what are the channels that you use? They need to be clear and filled with your content so that people understand what it is that you're doing in the current situation. And that's key to holding on to people. That's what creates the adhesiveness or stickiness to you. People will want to know where you stand, especially if you're doing these other 6 things, because they all work together to create an organization that has stability in its constituent base. And that's what you need to be most concerned about. Sixth is a culture of adaptation. And this is something I do a lot of work for with organizations. So I go into organizations and I help them to get unstuck, especially if you're a leader. If you're a leader, it's easy for your staff to say, look, we've got to do what we always did because that's how we got to where we are. But there's a really big problem with that, and that is that circumstances are changing, and leaders don't just continue doing the same thing that always worked. They are constantly sussing out the changes, the nuances of the environment, and they're charting new courses based on that. And the only way that you can do that effectively is if internally you have a culture of adaptation. And in a future podcast, I'm going to talk about how I go into organizations that are stuck and help them to shift into a culture where they are delivering new products and services based on what's taking place in the environment. That is what I call a culture of adaptation. So the insight here is that adaptation beats reaction. Right? Adaptation is where you suss out what it is that's going to keep you in a leadership position or move forward in the current climate, and you take action on it. You adapt your products and services to that. That's a key element of any successful business. So a culture of adaptation. And how do you get that internally? Well, as I said, I'm going to talk about that in quite a bit of detail in a future podcast. But let me just say, the first thing that you need to do is you need to help people understand what the business case is for innovation, and then what their role is in it and how they can support it. And you need to have somebody who's building an infrastructure for innovation and adaptation so that as new ideas for new products and services emerge, there's a stage gate process for them to go through so that you can quickly decide what should go to market and what shouldn't, and that you can stay ahead, that you can continue to lead in your space. The last area that I want to focus on is something that I call systemic foresight. And I'm indebted to Paul Bellantone. He and I worked together on a strategic foresight handbook, which can still be found on the web, when he was the executive director of Promotional Products of America International, Promotional Products Association International. We developed it jointly, and the agreement was that it would be freely available to anyone who wanted to use it at any time. I'll put a link to that in the comments below too. And the Strategic Foresight book is currently oriented towards PPAI, Promotional Products Association International, but it can be easily transposed because there are many examples in it to any organization. And it talks about how you create foresight. And foresight, believe it or not, is not that difficult to create. The farther out you go, the more challenging it is. And if you want to have like a 2-year horizon, that takes a lot of investment, a lot of work, and a lot of infrastructure. And I talk about how to do that in the Strategic Foresight Handbook. But I'm talking about just staying ahead of the curve really over the next 3 to 6 months, because when you're in a turbulent environment, it can even be the next few days to the next 6 months. So this is about creating the future. This is about understanding what are the trends that are emerging and how do you capitalize on them, and then driving the other areas like your new products and services that are coming through your culture of adaptation, or the voice that you're using through your different media channels, or the value-driven decisions you're making. As new information arises from the future, you want to make decisions that are aligned with it. And of course, your stakeholder alignment, making sure that everything that you're doing is keeping you aligned with your key stakeholders. And this strategic foresight cracks open the ability to have strategic agility, because now you're responding to circumstances not just as they occur, but right before they occur. And of course, this can only happen with the situational awareness that I talked about earlier. So, let's talk about seeing the future, right? Nobody can actually see the future. Nobody really knows what's going to happen in the next second, let alone the next 30 days. However, there are things that we can take to the bank about the future. For example, we can assume that the Earth is going to continue rotating on its axis and spinning around the sun, right? And that there's going to be a new day tomorrow. Now, of course, if that doesn't happen, none of us are going to be worrying about any of this. But we can assume that it's going to happen because it's part of our life. It's built in. And that assumption that the sun is going to come up tomorrow or the earth is going to spin so the sun appears to come up tomorrow, that assumption is actually foresight. It's actually saying that we are willing to predict the future that far. And that may seem like a silly example because we all know the sun's going to come up tomorrow. However, we are projecting. So the question comes, how far and what else can we project? And this is where systemic foresight comes into play. And in the organizations where I have helped to build a systemic foresight capability, one of the things we do is that we assemble a group of people who are capable of sharing with us the trends in their space. This is a lot like what I talked about earlier when I talked about developing situational awareness, only it extends now into the future. And one of the things that happens when you have your various stakeholder groups talking about future trends as they see them, and that could be, as I said earlier, in the next week, the next 30 days, the next 6 months, is that you start to see how different trends can be brought together and you can capitalize on them. For example, PepsiCo did this a while back, and two of the trends they were able to see was China coming online and do-it-yourself medical products coming online. And they knew that in China, there was a severe obesity epidemic due to diabetes. And so they decided to build a do-it-yourself kit that would help Chinese diabetics to control their insulin. And it took 2 years to build out that product line and focus on that. And all along the way, as they were doing that, they were assessing the viability. Was the information that they projected accurate? And how has it changed? And how does that mean that we have to change the products and services that we're developing? That's an example where an organization was actually able to have foresight that extended out 2 years and to build towards that. Well, let's take that example and pull it back and say we're living in a very uncertain environment. Can we do that for the next 30 to 60 days? And what would that look like? And how do we prepare for that? Then you begin to see that you can question legacy practices and you can build cross-sector partnerships to achieve the new products and services that you want to deliver in advance. And that is key. All right. So here's the 7 areas that I have seen in the past in other massive disruptions like 9/11, the COVID pandemic, and the 2008-2009 mortgage crisis. I have seen them save organizations because the leaders took action in these 7 areas. So let me just quickly go through them again. The first is situational awareness. How do we stay abreast of what's going on? The second is strategic agility. How do we make sure that our game plan is nimble and can adapt to circumstances? The third is stakeholder alignment, ensuring that you stay connected to and aligned with your core stakeholders. The fourth is value-driven decisions, knowing what your values are and making decisions in the turbulence that reflects those values, that's fully aligned with those values. The fifth is visibility and voice, making sure that your stakeholder groups are hearing from you loud and clear, that they know where you stand, they know what you're doing. And even, of course, if you have questions, you're sharing those questions so that they understand where you are right now in this turbulence. The sixth is having a culture of adaptation so that you are able to generate new products and services that make sense in the turbulent environment. And the seventh is systemic foresight, doing your homework so that you're bringing the future into today and you can begin planning for it. Again, I'll put links to the my disruption playbook, and I will put links to my strategic foresight playbook in the comments below. Thank you.